That's life.
That's life.
That's what all the people say.
Jesus and coffee. That's what it's all about. Got my vape. Got my coffee. Probably shouldn't have it on this unsturdy table. But if you have been watching my channel prior to this, I am making a series called How I Became an Addict. And it's going to probably be 8 parts. So buckle in, get some popcorn or some hot chocolate. I don't know which is better. Now, the first half, I've really breezed through. I basically just wanted to demonstrate in my last video that you can probably find right here. I don't know. It was called The Early Years. I wanted to demonstrate what exactly my mindset was when I was around 16. Which was that, one, I've really associated drug use with creativity, which I should not have done that. Because, well, actually, you know, drugs do give you some good creativity, but at that younger, tender age, I really thought you had to smoke weed and do acid to write beautiful music, so that was one big defining factor. And the second point I really wanted to hit on in the last video was that I did not get peer pressured, and I didn't slowly evolve up the ladder of drugs. I made drugs my identity overnight and immediately told myself, I said, Brandon, you are going to be a wasteoid. Why? I'm still trying to figure that out. I think I saw some dumb Jim Carrey movie, but Jim Carrey said something pretty profound in the movie. He said, what do all human beings want in life? And he said, freedom from concern. And now that I think back to that, I think that's what I wanted at that age. I saw people that drank and did drugs, and I thought, they don't seem to be anxious and they don't seem to care about anything. And I didn't want to care about nothing either. So, in turn, I immediately started trying to ingest anything I could get my hands on to some degree. At the age of 16 and 17, I probably, had I had better influences in my life, and let me first say this, I will always take personal responsibility. Everything that's happened to me, everything that will happen to me, it is my fault. Nobody forced me to do it. But had I met somebody that kind of pulled me into like, hey, maybe go to college, you know, maybe don't like do Adderall every day and Xanax and all that, maybe I would have been better. But I did not find that person. Instead, I met a girl who, let me just put it this way. Within like 3 weeks of me and this girl starting to date, my family nicknamed us Sid and Nancy. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, or Sid Vicious and that. They were just strung out heroin addicts that beat the shit out of each other all the time. And that pretty much was my relationship with this girl. It was balls to the wall, just do drugs. That's all you do. Just go surf for drugs and do them and fight and have a toxic relationship and scream at each other and punch each other in the face. Alright, so one thing, I gotta slow down because I'm already noticing I'm talking too fast. 2, I gotta inform, I actually wrote a bunch of notes today, and this is probably gonna be about a 2-hour video, but I had to write down like bullet points, so I have to follow that. Before I get into anything, let me just say this. When I was little, I remember my dad told me, because he was like an alcoholic and he did drugs and stuff. He said, Brandon, and when I say little, I mean like I was young. I was like 4 or 5. He would tell me all these messed up stories about crackheads and stuff that he knew. He said, Brandon, if you're going to do drugs and drink, he's telling this to a 5-year-old, I don't know why. He said, it's 5 years of fun and 40 years of paying dues. And by God, was he right? I think right now I'm paying the dues, but what I'm about to get into is I will call that 5-year grace period where things were good. I was a young buck, I was in love, and I only wanted one thing in life: to get as high as I possibly could. So before I go any further, I gotta back up before I met this girl, Sid and Nancy relationship that I had. There were two pivotal moments of my early years I wanted to breeze out of the way real quick. One is that I got my license when I was 16, and I found out really quick how much of a police state you live in, especially if you're a young drug user. I found that out really quick. And what happened was I got arrested the 3 days after I got my license for the first time. Me and my friend Mike, who I've talked about in this series before, we basically were like kind of art friends, you know, like we thought we were philosophers. Like we were always getting high and starting conversations by saying, I realized something the other day. And we would rant and we'd feed off of each other, and we both were musicians or whatever. So this was like my weed smoking homie, essentially. But 3 days after I got my license, we drove to Walmart because I don't know how old you are, but if you're below the age of 30, you definitely remember just going to Walmart when you were bored as a kid. So we did that at like 2 in the morning, which was not a good idea to be driving at that age and being that high. And I remember we walked into Walmart, and we both had this belief that you bring paranoia onto yourself. Like, the only reason you get arrested is because you're paranoid. We really believed that at that stupid age. But on this particular night, we were, from what I remember, we were really paranoid. Because we walked into the Walmart, and we're just walking around looking at people like really bloodshot eyes. And I remember my friend looked at me and he went, everybody that looks at us, they have one look on their face: concern. I thought that was so funny. It was true too, because when you're stoned and you're walking around Walmart at 2 in the morning and you probably reek of weed, people do look at you with one look: concern. And everybody looked at us with concern. So I think we eventually left, and I was so stupid. I didn't know how to drive. I barely even read my driver's handbook, that I drove down the wrong lane for like a while, and eventually got pulled over, and I got my first charge. Now, when you get a charge, in my state at least, and you're a minor, they don't take you to jail. They just kind of give you the papers, and then you have a court date. So that already screwed me mentally, and that paranoia and that sort of attitude followed me for years. Because I said this in the last video, but I said, I remember being like, I can't believe that cops can do this to people. Like, just pull you over and then yank you out of the car. It felt like it was happening once a week. I don't know why. And it happened to people. My brother-in-law, he didn't even do drugs, and he was constantly getting harassed by the police. And I actually got in a lot of shit once because I posted on Ask Leo, the subreddit, Ask Law Enforcement. I wrote, what's stopping you cops from lying about the dog smelling drugs? Like, what's making you, why do you even be honest? Like, you could easily lie and then search somebody. And they were like, oh, well, I wouldn't sacrifice my career for a $30 pot bus. And I'm like, well, it seems like you would, because I remember I wouldn't even have stuff in my car. And they pulled that German Shepherd out. Oh, there it is. Or it would do the thing where it would put its paw down. Fucking fucking shepherds, German. I hate them. So I had my first arrest that week, and my parents were pissed. And they knew. They probably knew. They were like, Brandon seems stoned all the time, so makes sense. But this was a week after my first arrest. I'm hanging out with my friend named Black Vince. And everybody called him Black Vince because in the town I grew up in, let's be real, it was like a hick, podunk white people town. You know, like rednecks and all that. And he was I guess you token black guy. But what I remember was he was the connect. Because he was one of those, like, social butterfly people who he was just always calling people and hanging out with other people. Me, I'm more of introvert. I like to get my stuff and split and then hang out by myself. But this kid, Black Vince, he knew so many people, and he was dangerously charismatic. He was a really cool kid. I remember every time I'd be around him and he would meet a new white kid, he would start telling the most racist jokes ever. And they would just be laughing because it was coming from a black guy. And that has shaped my view on racism to this day. I truly think that if the races could make fun of each other more and, like, be more openly racist in a joking way, I think we'd be closer. So there's that. That was Black Vince. But he was my friend, but he was a sketchball. He was the type of person you never leave your girlfriend alone with him. Because he was just banging everybody. And this kid was all day. He would go from friend's house. He knew everybody in the town, so he got the weed, and he would reap the benefits of getting smoked up for free if you were to hang out with old Black Vince. So anyways, I picked Black Vince up at like 1 a.m, and we drove to this kid's house who had his own apartment, and he was only a couple years older than us. His name was John. And he kind of was a skinny white guy with a beard, and he dressed like a juggalo. I don't know if you know what the ICP fans, you know, they wear the black and the, what do juggalos wear? Dog collars? I don't know. I'm not a juggalo. But he was kind of just chilling in his apartment with all these Hatchet Man posters on the wall. And here I'm like 17, I'm young, green, I don't know anything. And I had to sacrifice. I didn't like being around people. I didn't like going into random juggalos' houses to get weed, but I had to do it to get the weed. And I had to use Black Vince to get that weed. So that night we go to his house, and I will never forget this. He had all these court papers. This guy, John, the white guy, he had all these court papers on the floor, and Black Vince looked at him and said, "Hey man, are you almost finished with this court stuff? Like, are they gonna let you go? Are you on probation?" And I'll never forget this guy, John. He just yawned. He looked so exhausted. I guess he got like a pot arrest or something. And being that I had just gotten one like a week prior, I was like, oh, this is going to be a rough I don't want to keep getting arrested. So I became more and more cautious. Not on this night, and we'll get to that. But I remember we hung around and we smoked, and it was very good weed. I think it was sour diesel. And this was back in my early grace days. I gotta keep shaking the camera. My early grace days, I remember smoking weed when I was like 16 and 17, and it being awesome. Like, there were times I would get so stoned that I would see entire cartoon movies in my head, and I would say to myself, I bet you this is what heroin feels like. Like, no joke. I would be in such a blissful state. Now, that eventually went away, and we'll get to that. Maybe psychedelics caused it, or I don't know. Once you start tripping on acid a bunch of times, weed becomes less fun once you start exploring the dark corners of your mind. So eventually, I got like a quarter of this sour diesel stuff. And me and Black Vince are like, all right, let's go home. It's like 3 a.m. And I remember as soon as we got out into the parking lot, I said, dude, I'm too high to drive. because I don't think I was used to weed that was this good yet. I think I had been used to like shaky twigs and pebbles weed. And he said, "All right, man, I'll drive. No worries. I got you." I said, "All right, cool." Well, he's driving, which puts me in a legal gray zone where I can't get arrested. But I had a bowl on me too, and I was so green and stupid at this time. I didn't realize if you had a big fat rainbow colored bowl with weed resin in it, I didn't realize that was a weed charge. So all I remember is we're driving home and he goes, "Let's play it safe and let's take the back roads because there are less cops." Years later, I learned never to take the highway because there are way more cops lingering around the weird outskirts of town than there are on the highway. Take the highway. I wish I would have taken the highway that night. So he's driving home, and I remember we're driving past his school in the town I lived in, and he's pointing at houses and going, "Oh, that's where Jarrett lived." And it was this was really kind of absurd and kind of funny to me, was the song "Wake Me Up When September Ends" came on the radio.
The innocent can never.
And if you know that song, there's like 45 seconds at the beginning where it's just like down now 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 down now now now. And Black Vince is driving my car. We're both extremely stoned. And he starts just narrating like his high school days, like it was like voiceover for a movie, like on top of "Wake Me Up When September Ends." And I remember just looking at him like, this is really tripping me out. Like, why are you all of a sudden narrating your life? He was like, "Meow, meow, 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 meow." You know, that song's on, and he's like, "Yeah, we were just 16 years old. I had just met the love of my life." And I'm like looking at him like, what the fuck? And he's like, "I'll never forget this road. They put up speed bumps as if that was gonna slow us down." And he's like narrating his life. And I remember being like, "Dude, I'm too high to deal with this." He's driving. Yet all we cared about back then was drinking booze and smoking weed and getting with girls. And all of a sudden we're driving and I'm looking at him and I see the red and the blue lights of doom.
Wake me up when September.
And mind you, I'd just gotten arrested the week before. And I'm in the passenger seat. So in my head, I'm like, I guess all the responsibility is going to fall on him. I don't know. Was he swerving? Of course, it was probably like a red light or a brake light was out. But he pulled over, and I remember thinking, well, I'm really stoned. At least I won't have to talk because he's driving. And I'm looking to the left over at him driving the car, waiting to see a cop walk up to his car. But that didn't happen. I guess the cop looked into the car. He probably looked up my name that was connected to the car and realized I'm a white guy and there was a black guy driving. So he probably thought it's probably the owner in the passenger seat. So the cop, I'm just sitting there looking to the left and I hear, and it freaked me out. Like, had I had moments to prepare, it would have been better. I would have been more, but it really kind of bugged me out. Like, oh, there's a cop over my shoulder. And I rolled down the window, and I have no idea what to say. And I'm pretty sure my mouth was like, there was spit, like dry spit on the corner of my mouth. And those lights kill you when you're really stoned. I just remember being young, being stoned, getting pulled over. Two things would happen. You would get blinded, essentially. Two, you would get really cold. Because I literally remember, as we were getting pulled over, me and Black Vince were shaking. Like, I think it was fall was just starting to happen. So we're cold and we're shaky. And the cop's asking me all these questions. He's doing all those tactics where they try to throw you off. And eventually he said, "All right, bud, step out of the car." So I stepped out. and I had this big brown, I guess Carhartt looking jacket, and he pulled me to the back of the car, and he left Vince in the car. Like, he didn't even bother him. And he went, "All right, bud, I can see in your pocket you have cigarettes," which I did. I had a pack of green Marlboro menthols. And he said, "You're not old enough to have cigarettes now, are you?" And I said, "No." And this is how he tricked me. He went, "Well, now that I found your cigarettes, I think I'm going to have to go ahead and search your car." Which, in my head, I know I have a bowl in there. I had weed on me, but I think I shoved it in between my butt cheeks. It only took one arrest, like a week before, for me to learn, put everything in your butt cheeks. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care what people say. People say it's gay. Oh, that's gay. I don't care. It has saved me from numerous arrests. So he kind of tricked me into letting him search my car, which I learned to never do that again. But here's the thing is I put the bowl in my glove box, which had a lock on it. So in my head, I'm thinking, I'm probably safe. He can't get in there. But, of course, there was a key on my key ring. And before you know it, I'm taking way too long on this story in particular, but the cop came back, put me in cuffs, said, "I found your weed, found your bowl, blah, blah, blah." It was my... And he asked me, "Have you ever been arrested before?" And I said, "Oh." I was like, "Dude, I just got arrested a week ago." And he was like, "Ooh, that's not good." And I was like, here's the thing is, I was absolutely stoned, but the cop didn't want to impound my car, which is good. But he made me drop Vince off 40 minutes away and followed me and then made me drive home. He knew I was stoned, and I was stoned. And then I had to knock on my fucking door, and I had to go down and wake up my dad. And I'll never forget, he came upstairs, and the cop said, "Hi, are you the father?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, your son has been arrested for possession and paraphernalia. He can contest it in court, blah, 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 blah." And I just remember my dad said, "Is he going to lose his license?" And the cop said, "No, this is not a traffic charge." Door shuts, and immediately I start getting grilled. I really need to speed through this part, but I start getting grilled, and I'll never forget, my dad asked me a question, and I responded sarcastically, and he went, "Shut the fuck up!" So I didn't win that argument. Okay, that took 15 minutes. I should not have taken that long. This might have to be a two-parter or something. Alright, so now that I got that out of the way, 2 arrests within a week. I'm 16 or 17. You would think at that point I would have learned my lessons, learned to be fully paranoid of all cops, which I was. I actually specifically remember YouTube was just getting really big at this time. And I remember I would get really stoned. I was still a senior in high school, I think. And I would just click through YouTube for hours. And I remember this, I'm only telling you this so you have an example of like how traumatic these cop incidents were to a 16-year-old that doesn't know any better. I mean, come on. Yeah, I wasn't killed by the cop, whatever. It became a lifelong fear, and I'm not lying when I immediately learned, hide everything in your butt cheeks. I call it the great crime avoider. People have laughed at me my whole life, and everybody that laughs at me for using my suitcase to hide weed and drugs, they've all been to jail and prison, because what happens is you get sucked into the system. You get a possession charge, then you piss dirty, then you go to jail, you get out, you're on parole, you piss dirty, then you go to prison. So everybody that has ever made fun of me for this is not laughing now. So you would think I'd learn my lesson. Nope. 1 week later. And this was right around the time I met Taylor, which is what I'm going to dedicate most of this video to. What happened to me essentially was I had a group of friends, and 2 of them were into weed and drinking, and the rest weren't. So we had sort of like a faction split where one hand wouldn't tell the other what the other was doing, and we kind of tried to hide it from the straight edge ones. And I had one of my best friends, his name was Cody, and he had gotten into this terrible scooter accident where he was riding with one of my other friends on the back, and they were driving through a field, and they slid out and got ejected from the front of the scooter, and my friend landed, but my other friend landed on his hip and smashed his hip up. So he was on Oxycontin 80 milligram at like age 16, but he was smart enough to only use that for pain relief, and he never became an addict. Meanwhile, at this point, I'm already smoking weed and trying to drink as much as I possibly could. But one night, me and my friends that also smoked weed went out driving, and they said, hey, let's go pick up Cody. And I remember thinking, I don't know about that. Like, it's going to be weird. Like, all my straight edge friends knew that I was devolving into sort of addict behavior at this point. But I remember I didn't want to be smoking with him in the car. But regardless, we did it. So I'm driving in this beat up old Thunderbird that I had. Mind you, and I know I've said this like 20 times, but I had been arrested twice in 2 weeks. It's about 2 weeks later. And at this point, I already have to see like a youth minor offender person specialist lady who will determine if I go to court. It kind of was like seeing a therapist. And I remember she said, you've been arrested twice in a year. That's not good. That doesn't look good. You do not look like you're willing to change. If you get arrested again, we will lock you up. You will get locked up and you will probably do time and we'll stack the charges. So I'm 16, I'm like 17 or something. And mind you, I did not live a life of crime. I eventually kind of squared up in that regard. But I have it in the back of my head, this constant paranoia of cops. So I've essentially learned to be as smart as you can, to drive the speed limit. I'm pretty sure I just was in a perpetual state of having brake lights not working, but I figured, well, if I don't have a bowl on me and I could hide or swallow whatever, it'll be better. So me and my stoner friends would go to this 7-Eleven that was owned by like this Muslim guy that was friends with my dad. Nice guy. I think he died recently, which is sad. But he flew in this like young Muslim guy who would sell me and my other friends cigarettes and those little Easy Wider joint roller things. And we didn't know how to roll joints. I remember, because you have to actually roll it. There comes a point when you're rolling a joint where you have to do some sort of wizardry and then make a joint. I would just kind of jam it in, and it looked like a trash bag that has too many like cans and milk jugs in it. like stuff is ripping through the bag. It just looks like a big triangular trash bag of a joint. So here I'm driving around with my straight edge friend that doesn't even smoke weed. With my stoner friends, we're high, the car smells, we have weed on us, and we have joints, and we have rolling paper. Well, being that I lived in like this small, podunk, insignificant little town that pretty much only had a McDonald's in it, we pulled up to the McDonald's. And mind you, my straight edge friend he's hanging out with us, but he's not smoking, was an only child. And if you've ever met an only child, I don't know if it's because they don't have an older brother to kick their ass for acting up in public. They love attention. And this kid, Cody, he specifically loved to like rattle people and be offensive and loud and rude. So we're in the drive-thru and I'm trying to be as respectful as I can. Hi, can I get 2 McDoubles and a McChicken? All of a sudden, my friend, who's not high, doesn't even realize the consequences of drawing attention to yourself in a car full of high teenagers. He interrupts me and just goes, "Give me a McChicken, bitch!" He said it right into the speaker. So we start laughing. And I'm like, no, 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 don't ignore him. He's mentally retarded. Can we just get in some fries? My friend said, in some fries too. Get some fries. So we all divvied up the money and we pull up. And as I'm pulling up, it's this older lady, and she's just looking at us like, you little bastards. And it's all my friend's fault. I wasn't being disrespectful. He was the one that said, give me a McChicken, bitch. It's kind of funny now that I think about it. And she goes, all right, well, here's your McChicken and your McDoubles, but we're waiting on the fries. The fry machine is down right now. And I should have known right away she was up to some trickery. Because we're just sitting there like sitting ducks now in my stupid, beat up, freaking 2 paint jobs, fucking Thunderbird or whatever. And all of a sudden I look to the right and I see that big, scary, shark-looking cop vehicle. And my heart is just like fluttering. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to see this youth offender lady. This is gonna be 3 strikes for me. And I'm like, everybody get the joints and hide them. And I'm pretty sure I got everybody to hand me everything. And I just, right up the asshole. I just shoved paper and weed, any contraband we had, into my asshole. My tight 16-year-old senior in high school asshole. And the cops get out, and there were 2 short little guys. And I remember that night we were staying with my friend in his basement, and he had 2 lesbian moms, and they were actually pretty cool. Like, they told us, you can smoke weed here, we don't care. Just don't go out driving. But of course we did that. So these cops come up and they're yanking us out of the car. And I have to mention that a couple weeks prior, me and my friend Cody, the straight edge kid that didn't smoke weed, we were watching these how to get pulled over videos. And all these videos all misdirect you. They basically say, just crack your window and don't answer the cops' questions. It's really bad advice. Well, it's half good advice, but half bad. Like, you should roll your window down and be respectful. Don't be standoffish with the officer immediately. But the cops are searching through our pockets, and me and my friend are like, well, are you detaining me? Are you detaining me? We kept saying that until one of them finally, because we saw it on a video, like an instruction video. Finally, the cop said, yes, you are being detained, you little retards. And they were laughing. They were like having a, they were pretty decent cops. They were having a pretty fun night with us. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, dude, I'm going to get arrested. This sucks. I am in deep. And finally, the cop said, just call your parents. Tell them to pick you up. Now, mind you, in the state of Maryland, if you get arrested as a minor, they don't take you to jail. So in my head, I'm like, I don't know if I'm under arrest. I think I got to the point where I was so angry and stressed out that I was just cursing at the cops, calling them pigs. I was like, you fucking pigs. I was screaming because I was like, it's over for me. It's over. And one by one, all of our freaking moms pulled up, and my mom pulled up with my sister in the car. And I just got into the car, and my mom was so mad. She was like, I can't believe it. This is the 3rd time in like 3 weeks. And I was so defeated. I was like, it's over. But then, as we're driving home, I realized, I'm like, wait a minute. I wasn't served any paperwork. And I didn't have any cuffs put on me. They just let us go. And I was so happy victoriously. But mind you, at this point, I have destroyed the trust of my parents. And mind you, I think I just met my girlfriend that week. And they had no idea it was about to get a whole lot worse. Alright, so where are we at in this story? Okay, so I'm 17. I almost got 3 arrests in like a period of a month. I'm already going down the wrong path. But, like I said earlier, had a better influence come into my life and kind of showed me. One regret I have, and this is one thing I kind of dislike baby boomers for. All my friends, parents that are baby boomers, I love boomers to death. I always defend them. But I think they let the millennials and the Gen Z run wild too much. Like letting us play video games all day and like not showing us discipline and self improvement. I didn't get. Ow! What the fuck was that? Ow. I didn't get into self improvement until like 2016. So I have no real. I don't want to go to college. I don't want to become. I don't want to take advantage of capitalism to improve myself and my net worth and financial gain. I didn't know any of that. I just wanted to get high. And I had just met this girl who, mind you, my family called us Sid and Nancy immediately because she's like this punk rock feminist girl. It almost felt like I was at a Y point in my life and I could have gone one way, but instead it was like two chemical opposites, me and this girl, came together, not realizing that we would slowly but surely burn down everything in our path. And that is exactly what we did. Because at this point, I was just dabbling with weed and Adderall. But when I met this girl, she was talking, oh, MDMA and Molly. And we watched the movie Train Spotting, and she was like, I really want to do heroin one day. And I'm like, ooh, that's like, I didn't even know what heroin was. I was like, it's like a liquid, right? But like, what is it? I didn't know like what it was. I thought it was an essence. It wasn't even a powder or a liquid. It was just heroin. It was heroin. But I'm not going to get into that because we didn't do that for a little while. Like, we had a grace period where we kind of just dabbled. But at the time, she was really into doing these things called triple C's, which I don't even see anymore. I don't hear about triple C's. I don't ever see Reddit posts on triple C's. I think people are smart enough not to take triple C's. I actually swallowed so many triple C's, which is Coricidin, cough, and cold, with this girl that if I see the box present day, like at a CVS, I will throw up. As soon as I see that purple in the little heart, I get violently sick because it's very dangerous. It was essentially taking Robitussin, like DXM, but these little red devil pills had like 40 milligrams, whereas like a Robitussin gel cap had like maybe 10 milligrams. So you didn't have to swallow that many triple C's. But I think I mentioned in the last video that my life kind of changed overnight. I had never had a girlfriend before this, and all of a sudden me and this girl are like living together, and she's kind of like a blabbermouth, and I'm not gonna lie, she's kind of fucked up. Uh, I don't mean to sound disrespectful or rude, but when I say daddy issues, some girls claim to have daddy issues, and they really don't. Like, maybe their dad didn't let them use their credit card when they were 15. Oh, daddy issues. No, this girl had severe. Like, her dad was like a monster. And when I first met her, she told me a story. She said, yeah, I was 8 years old, and my dad gave my mom acid, and then he chased her around town with a shotgun, shooting at her. So I immediately was like, all right, this girl had a very traumatic childhood. And she has watched her mom get beat within an inch of her life by her big James Gandolfini dad. Who, by the way, when I met this guy the first time, I was legitimately, like, terrified of the guy. And I wouldn't even say I'm that afraid of many people because, one, I don't care if I lose a fight. I've lost a lot of fights gracefully. Two, I'm not afraid of dying or getting embarrassed. So it's really hard for me to fear people. But there has been a couple people, like this guy legit was scary. Like when I shook his hand the first time, his hand swallowed like half of my forearm. Oh. So this girl's kind of messed up in the head. But I was too, in my own pussy-ass way. And she's, like, preaching all this feminism stuff. And let me just make a point here real quick. I remember feminism years before, what was it, 2015, when the internet all of a sudden became anti-feminism. It really started with hipsters. I don't know if you remember early to mid-2000s hipsters. But the hipsters kind of like hung out, listened to Neutral Milk Hotel, they collected records. They didn't really have personalities, but they weren't really political yet. But feminism and anarchist spirit ran through these hipster groups. And my girlfriend was essentially, she wasn't a hipster, but her friends were, and I didn't like them, and they didn't like me. Like, they were into, like, socialism and stuff, and I was like, I hated them. They were pretentious, weird looking. They dressed like hipsters. Didn't like them. They didn't like me. They probably thought I was a square, and I probably was, to be fair. But I immediately remember, like, this contention started growing between me and this girl pretty quickly, where she was, like, ranting about the patriarchy and all this shit that I didn't agree with, even at, like, the tender age of 16. And we started fighting, like, immediately. And because she was raised in such a hostile environment, watching her dad chase her mom with a shotgun while she's on acid, I remember the first fight we got into that started to boil into the yelling phase of the fight. I just remember seeing white and my head bobbed back. So what the fuck? And she just punched me in the face. So there was a long period of me and this girl, very toxic but loving relationship, like we loved each other to death, where we would get into fights and she would just punch me in the face. And we'll get to that down the road. And mind you, up until this point, 17 years old, the only music I really listened to was the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and System of a Down. Those were the three bands that I was obsessed with. But this girl, being that she was like a record collector, sort of made music like a big part of her identity. Like I told you, like when I met her, she had this Tegan and Sarah haircut, big black leather punk boots, blah blah. She got me into some of the best music that changed the course of my life forever. Like I remember at first I was like, she would always play this band called Jawbreaker, and I fucking hated Jawbreaker. I hated that fucking band. And I didn't really like, I wasn't into the punk stuff yet. But I remember she put on In the Aeroplane Over the Sea, the record, and I remember just looking at it and listening to like Oh Calmly and being like, wow, this is a amazing music. And this was back in the time when like music would spread word of mouth. Like that album by Neutral Milk Hotel spread through my town all because of her. Like my older brother got into it, he got his friends into it, I got my friends into it. It just spread and spread. And all of a sudden I was branching into this like new kind of underground, yeah, like maybe not underground, but as opposed to the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, it became Neutral Milk, Velvet Underground, Violent Femmes, Against Me, The Specials. A lot of good music. So, where am I? Okay, Triple C's. So she was into taking a ton of these Triple C's. So she would go in, we would drive up to like Giant Eagle grocery store. And she would just walk in looking like a punk with her purse. And she would just steal a shit ton of these boxes. And she'd come out, all right, let's trip. Let's have a trip. And I remember I would take like 8 of them, which was a lot. And she would take like 20. And I didn't realize how strong of a psychedelic these things were, because I remember years later my friend Mike, who actually got so into psychedelics, I've talked about him before, that he kind of lost like the plot for a while. And I remember he said, I have seen more hallucinations on Triple C's than I ever did on mushrooms or acid. And I didn't like tripping that much. Like, the DXM trip is a trip in itself in the sense that it's not really scary. You basically just, your eyes bug out. Everything is like, and then everything just feels weird and ringy and gross. But I remember the first night we did triple C's together. We watched I think it was called The Secret of Nymph. I have to look this up. Okay, yeah. It's called The Secret of Nymph. It's like this little mousy squirrel thing, and it's a movie for kids. It's like a Disney movie. But we were watching it, and I'm like, this is terrifying. I was terrified of the movie. I'm like, how did our parents get away with showing us this? And I just remember we would trip together, and our eyes would be huge, and we walked outside, and we were hugging each other. And I remember thinking, it's never going to be this good again. There was this big thing with me where I was like, it felt like pinch me, I'm dreaming. And I said that in the last video, but I really mean it because, like, not only were me and this girl super close and had a drug connection, but we also were both as equally lost, and we were both being outcast from our groups. And I remember at this time, all of my friends started turning on me one by one. And I think it was because of her. I don't think they liked her. But a lot of my friend group started hanging out with, like, the popular kids. And these are the popular kids that, like, hung out with, like, the pretty blonde girls. Which I always thought, I hated the popular kids when I was in school. I thought they were fake. I thought they weren't funny. There was, like, this specific type of popular kid humor where they would just act like a retard and everybody would laugh. Kind of class clowny-esque stuff. I didn't like them. In my group of friends, I prohibited us from doing anything cookie cutter or fake or for personal gain. Or I kind of, in a way, I kept us a circle of boys. And I didn't like girls. I always thought girls were trying to throw wrenches in our group. And what we did was we were bands, and we were making cartoons and films, and so we had this like weird art group. And I know I already said that in the last video. But all my friends, one by one, started hanging out with these popular kids, and I was like, well, let them be what they like. Their personalities started to change. And I think that they looked at me and thought, yeah, I think Brandon might be going down the wrong path because he's high all the time. Now he's hanging out with this drugged out girl, and they're doing Coracetin cold pills. So, God, how long is this video? I was supposed to breeze through the arrest stories, and to be honest, I'm kind of spent. So this, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to make this like a 10-part series. I got to finish this later because I've talked too much and my brain is starting to hurt. If you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. I hope... Am I a good storyteller? I hope I am. I'm trying to slow it down a little bit because once I get too fast and jumbled, I stop making sense. I get really excited to talk. So, hope you liked the video. And there will be a part 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6, 7. And trust me, it gets a lot worse. I haven't even gotten into the part where I got into opiates yet. This was years away. So,